So these are some examples of things that you might not want to know about yourself. And you can see these probably look like sections of your resume or your CV. So again, studying over the application documents that you submitted, and a good activity to prepare is to have a story for everything that's on your document. So what would you say if you were asked about that leadership role in that club or organization? Or what would you say if you were asked about that rotation that you listed on your document? So just having a story can help you make those connections and highlight your skills a little bit easier when it comes time to talk about it in an interview. And if you kind of are stumped about what to talk about in terms of your skill set, there's a couple different things that you can pull from. So NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and they have established through surveys of employers over the years, I think 10 or a certain amount of career readiness competencies. And so what they have defined, and so what they mean by this is if students or recent graduates have all of these things and they do them well, they are kind of stamped career ready. And so the areas that they identified that are important are things like critical thinking and problem solving, oral and written communication, teamwork and collaboration, digital technology, leadership, professionalism and work ethic, career management, and global and intercultural fluency. So those you can see are not industry specific. Those are things that across all industries. So what can be helpful also is to think about these competencies and think about where you fall in terms of your skill level. So how might you talk about your critical thinking and problem solving? Because we've identified that every employer wants somebody with those skills. How would you talk about your leadership or how you manage your career and identify opportunities for you to grow? So that's a great thing to think about also. Let me make my screen bigger. There we go. You also could think about specific competencies for your industry. And so here's an example of one that I've pulled. So the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education has identified these 6 competencies for entry-level physicians. So you can see it's everything from patient care, medical knowledge, practice-based, but also some of the things that we just talked about in NACE. So professionalism, interpersonal and communication skills. So thinking about your skills in terms of these competencies, whether they're specific to your industry or cross-industry like the NACE ones, can be helpful to give you things that you might want to talk about in an interview. So you might write down on that sticky note that you're going to pop on the side of your computer screen, patient care, this story from this rotation, or medical knowledge, this is how I study best, or things like that. So those are also great things to pull from if you're kind of stumped about what to talk about in terms of your skills for an interview. Things that you might want to look up about an employer are their mission, their values, their organizational structure and career path. So how might you move up within an organization? What are they in the news for? Is it good? Is it bad? What is the size of their organization? So if you're going to be working at a small organization of 4 people, it's a lot different than if you'd be working at an organization of 50. You might need to be a generalist versus a specialist. And there's a lot of things that go along with that. Where are they physically located? Who's their competition? And then what do they do? So that's kind of a basic check sheet of things to know about an employer. As you look into their website, you'll find things that prompt questions. So you may be looking at their HR site and they've got this really cool thing that they let employees do, and you can ask about that. Or they've got a different mission and values for what would be your department versus what is the organization as a whole. So you can see how those two compare. So let the questions that you think of be a result of your research and reflect genuine interest. One thing to absolutely make sure you do is to keep the job posting. So once you apply for something, whether it's, if it's posted online, once that opportunity closes, a lot of times that job posting goes away and you don't have access to it anymore. So save it, print it, do something, screenshot it so you have it, because that's your cheat sheet. That is where the employer has told you what they want for somebody in that role. So if you keep that and use it as a study guide, that will also be a good thing. Types of questions that you might get range from everything from educational background to sensitive questions, and I'll go over what those are. Career goals, personal qualities. Again, these probably look like maybe either sections of your resume or things that you've thought about addressing in a cover letter. We also have, I won't click on it, but we also have a link to general or common questions that you might be asked. And so I can share the slides after, and then you can have access to this link as well. So one of the resources or one of the methods that's really good at helping you address those situational questions, and what I mean by situational questions are the ones that start with, tell me about a time when, or what would you do if, those kinds of things. Tell me about a time when you had to step into a leadership role, or tell me about a time when you had a conflict. What an employer is looking for with those types of questions is a story. How you acted in a situation like that, because everybody's had to step up into a leadership role at some time. Everybody has disagreed with somebody at some point. So they want to know how you act in a certain situation. So the best way to answer that question is to follow what's called the START technique. And so that's where you describe the situation that you were in, the task that you needed to accomplish, the action that you took, the results of that situation, and then the knowledge that you gained. So this can be used for a lot of different things, and you can use piecemeal, kind of whatever works for you. But let me show you an example of that. So say, for example, you're in an interview and the interviewer asks you to tell me about a time when you experienced conflict while working on a team. So you might say, I worked with a team on writing an article. One of my teammates was not completing their section, so we divided up their work. If I could see you, I would make you raise your hand and tell me if this is a good answer or not. I'm going to assume that your answer is no, this is not a good answer, because it is very short and it doesn't really tell you about what this person did. So a better answer using the START technique might be, you can see I've color coded each of these. So the S section, so the situation in my lab last spring, we worked on a team to get a paper published. T, one of my teammates, T is for task. One of my teammates wasn't doing their part of the work. That's the task they had to address. The action is they pulled that person aside and said, are there particular skills that we can use to better assign assignments to you? The result was they got to do something that they liked better, and we successfully completed each component. And the knowledge is that they would, ask that question before starting any other group project. So that is a full and complete answer. You'll also notice that right here in the blue section, it says, so I pulled this person aside. And here it says we divided up their work. So when you're answering a situational question, you want to talk about what you did. Not what we did, because we are not interviewing, you are interviewing. So talk about the work that you did. So in general, when we are answering interview questions, it's always a good idea to provide examples, because it's kind of like showing versus telling. Like, you can tell anybody you have skills, but if you show them how you use and got those skills, then it's going to be better, and they'll be able to see it a little bit easier. There may be a time in a virtual interview, in any sort of interview, where you are just stumped or your mind goes blank and you're like, I had this great answer and now it's gone. It is absolutely okay to say, hey, that's a great question. Can I have a minute to think about it? Again, remember when I told you at the beginning, interviews are about fit. An interviewer wants you to do well. They've selected you because you have great qualifications. Again, they just need that last stamp of approval to move you through the process. So they want you to do well. So it's okay to take time to think about what your answer would be. You do want to make sure you're honest in this process. I'm sure you have experienced or will experience soon how small your world gets the further you get in your career. You will find that people know people who you met 5 years ago, who you just met today, and you don't know who talks. So just be mindful and keep your answers honest. And then speak clearly. I've said that before, but just make sure you're projecting so people can hear you. So some of the two, I think, probably least favorite questions that I talk about in mock interviews are, tell me about yourself and tell me about a weakness. So for tell me about yourself, I would love for you to think about this question as a freebie, because you really get to talk about whatever makes you look good. And so things that are good to talk about and tell me about if you get asked, tell me about yourself, is a little bit about your education. So maybe how you chose your program, what keeps you going, your motivation to stay in that industry, why you're interested in that employer and that job. There may be a follow-up question about, why this job, why this employer, but you can't control any of the questions that they ask you. You can only control your answers. So you don't want to be banking on them asking you a question later that you could potentially address in this situation. So tell me about yourself. There's a lot you can do with it. What you don't want to do with it is say, well, I was born in North Carolina, and then for kindergarten, I brought this into show and tell. They only need to hear what's relevant for the role. So things that are good to think about or to talk about in this question are, like I said, so your education, your interest in the field, your interest and motivation to keep going in the field through your degree programs, and then why you would be a good fit or why you're interested in this position, this role, this company. And then for tell me about a weakness, they are, yes, looking for a weakness, and they want you to show that you are emotionally intelligent enough to be aware of your weaknesses, but this can also be a tricky one. So you do want to pick a weakness that's not essential to the job. So for example, if I'm applying for a teaching role, I don't want to say that I'm afraid of public speaking because that's the main focus of the job. So you can be creative in the weaknesses that you think of in terms of how they are used in the job. What you don't want to do is be cliche also, and go down the route of I care too much, or, I hear a lot of, I'm a perfectionist, so I spend a lot of time on details. Maybe that's you, but that's also a very common answer. So be genuine about this, but also show that you are working on or have overcome this weakness so you can spin it into a positive. So you don't just want to say, well, I'm bad at public speaking and leave it at that. You might want to say, I was bad at public speaking, but I spent a lot of time shadowing people who I thought were really great public speakers. And then I learned a lot through signing up to, give speeches. I signed up for Toastmasters. I had people give me feedback, and now I'm not, now I've overcome that weakness. So you want to talk about a weakness, but also spin it into a positive to show that you're working on it or have worked on it. Some of the sensitive questions that sometimes come along in interviews are anything related to the ones on the slide. They should not be asking you, employers or interviewers should not be asking you these questions. You have probably seen a couple of them towards the bottom, disabilities, or have you been arrested in some form or fashion if you filled out a job application, but in a different way. So for example, you can't be asked if you have ever been arrested. What you can be asked is, have you ever been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor? Because arresting doesn't, provide that you're guilty. So these are all questions that could invite discrimination. So you should not be asked these questions. However, sometimes people are nervous around interviews. So not just the interviewees. They might just be trying to make conversation, or this might be the first time they've ever interviewed somebody and they kind of don't know what to ask. So if you are asked a question like this, you could, consider the interviewer's motive. So for example, if somebody asked me, how old am I? They might be wondering if I have enough years of experience to qualify for this role. So if I were to answer that or be asked that question, I might say, either I could say, could you explain to me how that relates to the role? Or I might say, I'm thinking by that question that you are wondering about my years of experience. I can assure you, and here's a copy of my application documents again, that I have this degree, I've had this many years of experience, and I am, qualified to do this job and excited to be here. So it's generally a good idea to avoid becoming defensive or angry if you get these questions, especially if you're interested in this role and not prepared to walk out. You could restate your interest and why you're a good fit. But if you are asked a question like that, you can refuse to answer. You can say, I'm not comfortable with answering that question, or I don't understand how it relates to the role. Can you explain that to me? So again, those are things that you should not be asked.